The Occupy movement is spreading around the world, gaining more momentum. And with no end in sight, the protests are causing concern to governments everywhere as the EU finance ministers meet to find ways to resolve their biggest financial crisis to date. The distrust in the global financial system increases. Is there a way out? What is it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Shakun Tilasantharan. It began in New York but has now spread to more than 900 cities across the globe. The protesters, inspired by the Occupy Wall Street movement, continue to express their anger at the global financial system, corporate greed and government cutbacks. They're calling on their governments to stop heeding the concerns of financial markets while ignoring the plight of their own people. It's not certain how long these protests will continue. In New Zealand, reports suggest that hundreds of protesters are camping out for the next 6 weeks, while Toronto's St James's Park is now known as Tent City Central. And in Greece, which is suffering a severe economic crisis, people are angry at the government's tax policy and job cuts, as plans to resolve the country's debt dilemma appear to have stalled. From Athens, Andrew Simmons reports.
Greeks in line, restraining their anger over new taxes and more bureaucracy in getting them paid. In this office alone, they've taken an extra $8.25 million of tax this month compared with October last year. But it's a drop in the ocean compared with the country's massive debt. Not only that, the tax workers are overstretched. There's a staff of 38 here when it should be 60. And there should be 10 tax inspectors, but there are only 2. Here they're about to do a surprise audit on a restaurant. The tax director for this well-off quarter of Athens has an aerial map, checking out homes with swimming pools. He says many owners only declare a tiny proportion of their wealth. The eyes of so many hard-pressed Greeks are now focused more than ever on affluent areas where the rich have had it easy for so long. But many aren't aware of the staggering scale of unpaid taxes, an estimated $57 billion, and those figures come from the tax inspectors themselves. That colossal debt is shared between only 15,000 people. With such a black economy, only a fraction of that figure could realistically be retrieved. But with the right backing and staff levels, this tax director says Greece could be more than $14 billion a year better off.
I feel rage and anger. I'm upset that my country finds itself in this very bad situation. People here have come to pay their taxes patiently. Whoever thinks of not paying their taxes is committing a national crime.
Public anger with what people see as government inaction on tax evasion is likely to increase. And civil disobedience groups seem to be gaining ground.
Those taxes are for the simple people, not for those who make money from us, such as the bankers, the ship owners, and the private sector.
There are at least 8 new taxes, and they're hitting the poor and the middle classes harder than the rich, making the gulf between them even bigger at a time of national crisis. Andrew Simmons, Al Jazeera, Athens.
So that's the situation in Greece. Discontent certainly not just there. The Occupy protest movement is gaining steam. It all started in the US. The catchphrase, "We are the 99%." The 99% opposed to the 1% of society who make the big bucks, while everyone else just gets by. Mathematically speaking, the following figures support this claim. The bottom line literally represents American households with incomes of between $30,000 and $80,000, which really hasn't gone anywhere since the Great Depression. And then look at the top line, the top 1%, as they're called, with an average salary of $380,000 a year. The gap between the two is clearly very wide. The argument is that since the late President Ronald Reagan and also former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, for that matter, liberalised their economies, the rich got richer while the middle class languished. And here are more numbers backing this claim. These come from the IRS, the U.S. Tax Collection Agency. Back in 1988, the income of the average American was $33,400. 2 decades later, that income had actually fallen slightly to $33,000. And in New York, according to the state comptroller, the state auditor, the average salary of a private sector worker in the year 2010 was $66,120. while those in the financial industry were averaging $361,330, which tells you why people are out protesting on the streets. And joining us now are our 3 guests. In London, Kanja Sasay, a student officer at the National Union of Students. Kanja is a supporter of the Occupy protests. Also in London, Detlef Schlichter, author of the book Paper Money Collapse, The Folly of Elastic Money and the Coming Monetary Breakdown. In Brussels, Sony Kapoor. He's the managing director of Redefine, an international think tank that advises policymakers on economic and financial sector policy. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. If I could start with you, Kanja, we've seen those figures for the US. What are you and other protesters protesting about in the UK? What are you so upset about?
Well, you basically talked about the figures, and the figures don't lie, because if you have the 99%, the living standard of the 99% continues to decline, whilst the 1% continues to go the other way. It's an injustice system. We're calling for a global tax justice. We want taxpayers. We want the tax to be fair. We want the tax we want justice. There's so much injustice in this current economic climate. We've bailed out the bankers. Now we want the government. We want institutions to bail out the people as well. The people are suffering.
Detlef, are the protesters going about things the right way?
No, I fear they're not. I think there's a lot of confusion about the issues at hand here. You know, as you can see from the title of my book, I'm not defending the current monetary system, and I do think it is tremendously flawed and has many fundamental issues. I think the crisis will get worse, and I think public discontent will get worse. But I think to blame this on the free market or on capitalism is entirely wrong. We have a monetary system that is based on constant expansion of fiat money. We have a monetary system that is constantly providing additional bank reserves to the banking system, encourages borrowing and bank credit creation, and has created these massive piles of debt. We do have a financial crisis not because people are not paying their taxes. We have a financial crisis because the system is loaded with excess levels of debt. And we have to look at the economic causes of those debt loads. Greece has first and foremost a debt problem. So has the United States. So have other states. And just to simply claim that the government spends more money, on different groups of people, which seems to be one of the issues here, I think it's an illusion. The money isn't there. These governments are practically bankrupt. This is because of this financial crisis. So we need to look at what causes these dislocations and imbalances in our economies. So I would argue that capitalism is a scapegoat here. It's not the issue we face these problems.
Sony, do you agree with Detlef's take on the situation that capitalism is a scapegoat?
Not exactly. I mean, I think there were elements of truth in what both the previous speakers said. But what we are seeing is actually something that is the result of the interaction between the tax system, the financial system, and the basic fundamental tenets of a market economy. I think the previous speaker said that the United States, he included in his category of bankrupt states the United States. That simply isn't true. The US has a much lower tax to GDP ratio compared to most other OECD countries and rich countries, and could easily, either through blocking some corporate tax loopholes or increasing taxes on the rich or indeed on housing, have an immediately sustainable level of debt. There is no problem. Greece does have an unsustainable level of debt. That is a different problem. So let's not confuse the two. The interaction of unfair, increasingly unequal tax systems together with the economy is hugely dangerous. Now, if you remember when Henry Ford started paying his workers a salary that was 3 times the market rate. His logic was that my workers need to be able to afford to buy the cars. That's how capitalism works. You need demand, you need consumption. Now, it makes sense for any one country or one company to either cut wages or to levy most of the tax burden on those who are at the bottom segment of the society. But that's where demand comes from. So there's an optimal level of inequality which is perhaps needed to generate ambition, but also to generate investment. But we are far ahead of that level of inequality. We've far exceeded that, to the point where the current levels of inequality in the tax system is actually hurting the aggregate growth rate of the economy. That's one of the reasons growth has slowed down and now come to a dead halt. And yes, on top of that, we have a financial system which no longer serves its purpose of actually helping the real economy. Capitalism is not bad. It is capitalism that has brought us to the level of prosperity that we all take for granted now. But there are elements within that, in particular the way the financial system has been distorted through bad incentives, through bad tax incentives, which encourage debt over equity, through the bonus culture, etc., which has harmed the economy. And it's this combination of a highly inequitable, badly designed tax system and a badly designed financial system that is causing both the social and the economic unrest. And I do agree that both of these are going to get worse before they get better. And I think the Occupy movement, once it gets its messages right, has a very strong role to play in helping bring about that change, because it is against very strong entrenched interests who are politically and financially powerful.
Kanja, how do you see your role in effecting change? Do you agree with Detlev, or does it resonate what he said, that you're going about things the wrong way?
I think we're going about the things the right way, because one thing, whether or not people want to argue which system to use or not, we all agree that this current system is unfair, this current system is unequal. This is why you see people in London, people in New York, people across the globe are protesting against this in a peaceful manner. People are saying we reject the system because this system has resulted in a very unequal way. And I think this is the right way to go about it, which is why we're here discussing about this, because we've seen across the globe it's picking up so much pace. It's incredible. And I think more people need to join in this protest and actually say to our government, we reject this system, we need a fairer system. We live in a country where 75% of black people live in 88 of the poorest ward. We live in a very unequal country. And so we need to rechange our system. We need to make sure that the tax system that we have here, it's fair and it reflects the way that in a very fair manner. And for at this moment, it's not happening, which is why we're seeing people take to the streets, and we applaud them for that.
And at this point, are you trying to coordinate your protests? Is there any leadership to try and get more numbers joining these protests?
I think in terms of calling for numbers, I think a lot of people will continue to wake up to the injustice that exists, and I think over time, a lot of people will continue to join in this protest. Whether or not they have leaders or we don't have leaders, I think it's irrelevant. The mere fact that anybody can join in, black, white, regardless of his sexuality, everybody can join in this movement and continue to push for a much more fairer state. And I think that's the message that needs to be put across. And I think you continue to see people writing blogs, people taking to the street, people using all type of peaceful forms to make that message across. Because like the two previous speakers have said, it's going to get worse, and we need to make sure that we're holding our government to account.
Now, Detlev, you said the protesters aren't going about things the right way, but you're not against this Occupy protest movement, are you?
Well, I have some sympathy with the frustration that has been built up, but I still believe that I think the movement seems to be going about it the wrong way. First of all, I'm not quite sure if I really understand what the reform plans are, and what I seem to be hearing a lot is that there's demand for fairer taxation, which seems to be a demand for more redistribution, for taxing the rich more and channeling that money to the poorer population. So what I hear is people ask for a bigger state, for more government spending, for more redistribution of wealth, for higher taxation on income. Societies get wealthy, and let's not forget, contrary to the report that you showed earlier, since Ronald Reagan came to power or Margaret Thatcher came to power in the late 70s or 1980, the wealth has continued to grow and the Western societies have become wealthier. I agree that some income inequality has also risen, but I think a society, will first and foremost needs to provide opportunities for people to generate wealth, to become wealthy, and to improve their own lot. It's not just a question of redistributing wealth. We need markets, and we need a free market system to allow incomes to rise, and we need savings, we need capital investment, and that creates the kind of jobs and higher incomes and improves living conditions for people. And I think what I hear a lot is demand for more state and more government. Now the sheer fact is that governments have completely overextended themselves. I disagree with the point that America does not have a debt problem. The United States government right now is spending every year about $3.5 trillion and is taking in about $2 trillion by taxation. Most of that is taxation on income, on personal incomes. Now, for the last 10 years, it has not been possible for the American government to raise the intake from income tax in any substantial way. To assume that we can close this massive and unprecedented spending deficit, budget deficit, by simply taxing the rich is a complete illusion. I mean, if we raise tax levels to anywhere near those levels that would be needed to fund this extraordinary level of government spending in the United States, you would kill the economy right away. This is a complete illusion. The idea that a small minority of rich people are sitting on mountains of wealth, which we can just tax away, redistribute, and then everybody is happy, is completely wrong. So we need to look at why we are in this mess, and I think the problems globally are the same. We have excess levels of debt. All these governments are running massive budget deficits, and they're funding them not by taxation. They've not funded them for a very long time on taxation. They're increasingly relying on debt. And that has been the case specifically for the last 40 years, since we moved away from a monetary system that was based on what I call hard money, inelastic money. We used to have something like a gold standard, which I think is still the right monetary system for a capitalist system. In that kind of monetary system, spending by the government, borrowing by the government, but also lending and spending by the banks and the financial system is severely limited and restricted. For 40 years now, we've been running globally a complete fiat money system, a paper money system. For the first time in human history, it's a global system of unlimited money creation. And I agree with some of the frustration here, because that is a system that, yes, generates tremendous income in financial services. Yes, it helps people who have real estate or equity portfolios, because they can leverage them in such a monetary system and boost the value of these assets by borrowing.
Okay, Detlef, I'll get back to your idea that the economy shouldn't be based on paper money. We'll move on to that a little bit later. Sonia, I could see you shaking your head. You clearly disagree with what Detlef was saying.
Yes, well, just going back to what I said before, what we have is a tax system that is unfair, but I come at it from a different perspective. It's not just unfair, and that's one definite strong reason to protest against it and try and change it. But it's actually even bad from economic growth. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't care much about income inequality, which there are some people like that, but who cares purely about maximizing the size of the economic pie, we are at a level of inequality which is actually bad for growth. It is bad for aggregate demand, because there is nobody to actually buy the goods that people are making, because aggregate demand is drying up. The people at the bottom section of the society are not part of the consumption pool. And what it also means is the more the wealth gets concentrated at the top, the more it is invested. And what we have had is not just a debt glut, we've also had a savings glut. So if you have money to spare and you run out of productive investment opportunities, you put more and more into speculative opportunities such as real estate markets in London, etc. And that feeds the debt bubble more. So I think it's not possible to separate the badly functioning tax system which actually taxes labor more than capital, which discourages job creation, but doesn't discourage, for example, speculative investment, which allows there to be massive amounts of loopholes, so people who are rich are already paying a lower percentage of their taxes are able to exploit tax haven loopholes, which also actually are much more opaque than normal countries. So any financial systems, any derivative instruments, any subsidiaries in tax havens are not only bad in terms of unfairness of tax, but also they actually increase financial instability. There's yet another element. We have a tax system which favors debt over equity. Equity is risk sharing, where if you benefit, you as well as the person you have given equity to, you both benefit.
Right.
And debt is where there's an asymmetry that is created, and the tax system encourages excessive levels of debt.
Okay, let me go back to you, Kanja. What do you think your protests are actually achieving, and what will it take for the protests to stop?
I think one thing that we're achieving is that what you've seen across the world is that people are talking about the issues. People are talking about the mere fact that their states and their countries are unequal. People are talking about the injustice that this current system is facing. Whether or not people were to debate which system to use or not, all we can all agree, and what all the protesters agree on, is that capitalism is bad and capitalism is irresponsible. This is capitalism where where a CEO pays less tax than the average workers. This is a very unequal system, and one thing that will make the protest stop is if governments start listening to the protesters and start talking about how to reform the system, because at the moment the system, the government doesn't seem to want to listen to the demands of the protesters. It's a very unequal system. We now have youth unemployment as highest as for decades. We have so much inequality in this country alone, is that it has to stop. It cannot carry on like this, otherwise the protest will continue to grow.
I'm going to come back to you, Detlev. So capitalism, you've said, is being used as a scapegoat, and wrongly so. And you said that the global economy shouldn't be based on paper money. What should it be based on then?
Well, the capitalist system was always based on hard money, on commodity money. The entire growth of civilization, of capitalism globally, has been based on gold or silver. And let's not forget that the system we have now is not very old. Until 1971, so that's 40 years ago, there was still, although a small link, but still an effective link to gold, because around the world the dollar was used as a reserve currency, as it is today, and central banks around the world received a promise from the US government that they could exchange their dollar reserves for gold. And that put a very clear constraint on the production of money and the issuance of money by central banks, and therefore allowed the monetary system to be much more balanced and stable, because investment and credit creation was much more tied to true savings.
Okay.
One of the problems we face in our current system is that we can constantly encourage further money creation and credit creation.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have
by injecting more money into the financial system.
Okay, Detlev, I'm going to jump in there. We are running out of time here. Last word to you, Sonny. Very quickly, if you could summarize, how do you see the way out of this crisis, of these protests?
Well, I think the protesters are existing and are expanding, and that's a very important signal which shows something is not working, which then creates an openness for change. The two things we need to change are, we need to rethink our tax system so that it is encouraged to, so that it is designed to incentivize production rather than speculation. And the same to do with the financial system. We need to bring the financial system under check and make sure that it is a facilitator for the real economy and doesn't become an end in itself. These two together will mean we can go back to somewhat more old-fashioned capitalism, which we must not forget is the one system that has worked, market economies, and have brought us the kind of prosperity we see. There is a role for the state and there is a role for the markets, and we need the two of them balanced. They have gone out of balance.
Thank you very much. So much more to speak about. We're going to have to leave it there, though. Thank you very much, gentlemen. In London, Kanja Sasay and Detlev Schlichter. And in Brussels, Soni Kapoor. And thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, your comments and suggestions are very welcome. Please do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.com. Goodbye now.